Now, I gave two reasons why I think the Islamic conception of God is not wholly true. First, it seems to me morally inadequate. Notice that he agrees with me that God as the perfect being must be all-loving. So the issue here is the God of the Quran all-loving? And he says, yes, he is, because the word wadud is affirmed of God, that he's full of love and compassion. But Dr. Badawi then gives away his case by saying in the next sentence, he is willing to forgive those who will turn back to him. Thus, you see, God's love is conditional. It is not towards sinners and unbelievers. It is not an unconditional love. As Daoud Rahbar in his book, The God of Justice, writes, unqualified divine love for mankind is an idea completely alien to the Quran. Nowhere do we find the idea that God loves mankind. God's love is conditional. Jesus says in Luke 6:32, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And yet this is the highest level to which the God of the Quran rises in his love for human beings. He loves those who love him, who turn to him. In fact, Dr. Badawi, in his brochure on building bridges between Christians and Islam, virtually admits this. Listen to what Dr. Badawi says. He says, correct belief and good deeds are prerequisites for God's grace and forgiveness and for rising above our common shortcomings. You see, it's grace that requires prerequisites. It's not truly grace. We're talking about wages here, about earnings. And this isn't just my Western interpretation. Muhammad Zia Ullah, in his book, The Islamic Conception of God, he is a Muslim, explains the attribute of God being all-merciful by saying God rewards our deeds fully. That's what the mercy of God means. He rewards our deeds fully. And he says, we cannot have the least doubt that he will respond to our love by his. You see, it's conditional. It's to those who love him. Those are the ones he assigns love to. So the Quran says things like, God loves those with goodwill toward others. God loves those who incline to him. God loves those who are clean of heart. God loves those who are ready to fight in his cause. God loves those who prove steadfast in trials. Well, how do you measure up? Does God love you? Not unless you measure up to those standards. Now, Dr. Badawi says, well, look, it just means that God doesn't love the unbeliever's deeds, and he loves the deeds of the believers. Well, I hope that's true. I really do, but that's not what the Quran says. And he didn't give any argument or proof for that exegesis. The plain statements of the Quran are that God is an enemy to unbelievers. He doesn't love them. He loves those who love him and do good. Dr. Badawi says, in fact, then he goes on to say, I reject the idea of God's equal love of sinner and believer. Well, that is exactly my point. The most perfect being must love sinner and believer alike. That doesn't mean he blinks at sin. On the contrary, he must punish sin, and that's why Christ had to die. But God's love as the greatest conceivable being must be impartial and unconditional. Dr. Badawi quotes the Hadith, but all that proves at best is that it contradicts the Quran, not that it's correct. And besides, even in those quotations he read, God's love was still conditional. So I'm not convinced that the Islamic conception of God is morally adequate.